class 1, class 2, perhaps some of you are just joining for class 3, whatever. Thank you for joining us. Just before we begin, let's say some prayers to the Lord so we can be an instrument for his desire. Om Gana Tamarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksho Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Katadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vistaya Bhutale. Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine. Nivasisha Sunyavadi Pashtata Satarine. Okay, Hare Krishna. I just want to be sure that everyone can hear. I just saw a message there that someone cannot hear. Padma Nityananda, can you hear? Is everyone else? Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear
Aravind Karai
Yes.
saying, okay, so you can hear. Okay, great. Okay, so
it might be Aravind Prabhu might just need to put his volume up on his computer or laptop.
Yeah, Aravind Karai, if you're there, you might need to just turn your audio on, and then you can hear. But everyone else can hear. So thank you everyone again for attending this class. Again, I'm very excited to give this presentation. As you heard, this is the third class. The first class we were speaking about. Pseudonym. It is pseudonym, which means we were speaking somewhat on the effects of pure chanting on the meditation of a soul who's absorbed in the pure name and the different levels of absorption in regards to Krishna's name, fame, qualities and pastimes, etc. So that was just like a taster, because the title of the seminar is How to Improve Your Chanting. So the idea there is to hear about what is pure chanting, so we can be inspired to move into that direction. So that was the first class. That was on Pseudonym, and in the slide there you'll see it, Pseudonym there. And this class, or last week, or not last week, but the last class, we speaking about the 10 offenses, basically, how to improve our chanting. We're going along the lines of being aware of what the 10 offenses are. So for those who've had some experience, you may have lived in a temple, or you may have attended a temple program early in the morning before we chant japa, just after Tulsi Puja. Then we recite these 10 offenses. And also, if you've been present at a Diksha initiation ceremony, then as or after the Guru gives you the beads, then he will also speak about the 10 offenses. So this is, in other words, we want to avoid offenses to the holy name. In other words, to get to Pseudonym, we have to be free of offenses. So it's good to know what those offenses are. And even if we're somewhat familiar with them as devotees who live in a temple or aware of them, it's good for us to spend some time just looking at those offenses and making sure, like doing some internal cleaning to make sure that we are avoiding the offenses. Yeah. So that will bring us to the stage of namabhas. So that's what we want to achieve in this discussion, in this class today, at least to get us to the platform of clearing. That's called namabhas, where we're not making offenses and we're attentive to the holy name. And that's the clearing stage. That's called namabhas. So that will clear the stage for Pseudonym. Yeah. So I will ask for questions. Every now and again I'll stop and I'll ask, is there any questions? If not, you're welcome to put the questions on the chat. And I've got a little box up here with that so I can see that. But today I wanted to read something that I alluded to last week or the last class, and that's a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 3, 24. In other words, we might consider, are we committing offences? And from one perspective, we may even come to the conclusion that perhaps we are not committing offences. But from another perspective, pure chanting has its symptoms. So I will just read this verse from the second canto, just for a start on today's class, to put things into perspective. It's a wonderful purport by Srila Prabhupada, and also it's a very nice verse. I'll just read the translation. So Shaunaka Rishi speaking here from this in the second canto. Quote, certainly that heart is still framed, which in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes, and the hairs stand on end. And I'll just read Prabhupada's purport. It'll take about 1 minute or so, or perhaps 2 minutes. So please hear attentively. So Srila Prabhupada's purport. The whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. Vaidhi Bhakti, or regulated devotional service by the limbs of the body, namely the eyes, the ears, the nose, the hands, and the legs, as already explained here and before, is now stressed herein in relation to the mind, which is the impetus for all activities of the limbs of the body. It is expected by all means that by discharging regulated devotional service, one must manifest a change of heart. If there is no such change, the heart must be considered still framed, for it is not melted even when there is chanting of the holy name of the Lord. We must always remember that hearing and chanting are the basic principles of discharging devotional duties. And if they are properly performed, there will follow the reactional ecstasy with signs of tears in the eyes and standing of the hairs on the body. These are natural consequences and are the preliminary symptoms of the bhava stage, which occurs before one reaches the perfectional stage of prema, love of Godhead. If the reaction does not take place even after continuous hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offences only. That is the opinion of the Sandarbha. In the beginning of chanting of the holy name of the Lord, if the devotee has not been very careful about evading the 10 kinds of offences at the feet of the holy name, certainly the reaction of feeling separation will not be visible by tears in the eyes and standing of the hair on end. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So that's something to reflect upon. Perhaps when we're chanting, we may not experience these symptoms. Some of us may do. Some of us may have experienced such symptoms in the past. And generally, we are not experiencing these symptoms on a daily basis. So in that regard, as Prabhupada says here, we can consider it due to offences only. So in that light, let's approach this little study with that in mind. So how can we avoid offences? What are the offences? So in the last class, we spoke on offences 1 to 8. So I'll just read through them, and I'm not going to elaborate or speak on them. exactly, because I don't want to take unnecessary time, because we did speak about these in the last class. But if you're tuning in for the first time and you're curious about what was said about the first 8 offenses, if we have time at the end, that's an if, then we can take some questions on that and we can go back and look. But for now, let's just read the offenses. The first offense is to blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their lives for propagating the holy name of the Lord. Second offense, to consider the names of the demigods like Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be equal to or independent of the name of Lord Vishnu. Just as a side, hopefully those who were with us for the last class, as I'm going over these offenses, hopefully you can remember some of the points that were brought up in that regard. Number 3, we spoke about to disobey the orders of the spiritual master. And number 4, to blaspheme the Vedic scriptures or scriptures in pursuance of the Vedic version. Number 5, to consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be an imagination. 6, to give some interpretations to the holy name of the Lord. 7, to commit sinful activities on the strength of the holy name of the Lord. Number 8, to consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruit of activities, karma kanda. Number 9, to instruct a faithless person about the glories of the holy name. And that's where we come to today. So at this point, if you've got any questions on this introduction, please unmute and you can ask. If not, we'll just continue. I'm just going to go to slide number 40. Okay, so there's no questions as such as yet on that. I'd just like to reiterate as well that this study which we're doing here is based on a book by His Holiness Shivaram Swami called the New Vraj Mahima. It's a multi-volume book spanning 8 volumes. And this presentation is based on volume 8, which is just about chanting the holy name. It's about the glories of the holy name. And one chapter is called Avoiding Offences. So this is where we're getting this knowledge and information from. And so the 9th offense, this one is fairly, in one sense, you could say, quite straightforward, but we should be aware of it. Basically, the first class, we was describing quite some confidential descriptions of the holy name, the effects of Sudanam. So that type of thing, you're not going to explain to a newcomer. That's someone who comes first time to your Namahata or the temple. It's not something you're going to explain. Why is that? Because if they don't have sufficient faith, they may consider it, or they may have doubts in what you're saying. So, in other words, they may find fault. They may think you're some type of madman. They may think you're just exaggerating. So we have to be careful of what we explain to people. There's plenty of subjects we can speak to people when they first come to the temple about karma, about the basic activities we do, about our program of Harinam, about reincarnation. There's plenty that we can describe. But for those who don't have sufficient faith, then we shouldn't go into the confidential meaning of the holy name. Prabhupada, in that regard, the basic interpretation of the holy name is, my Lord, please engage me in your service. So that's what we would explain to someone who's coming for the first time or just coming to Krishna consciousness, because that's what it actually is. Now, as one progresses in chanting, then the details of that will be more revealed. So, in other words, we should invest others with knowledge of the holy name that's in proportion to their ability to accept it. Otherwise, there's not much point. And that ability would depends on how much faith they have. So as their faith grows, then we can give them more incremental knowledge on the truths of the holy name. So interesting, it's an offense to do other than that. In other words, the holy name, we spoke last class of having the idea, not the idea, but coming to the understanding that the holy name is a person, Nam Prabhu. So if we impart, or if we give wisdom beyond someone's ability to accept it, and doubts awaken, and they become unenthusiastic about devotional service, then we're doing the opposite of what a preacher should do. So in other words, if Nam Prabhu sees his representative producing the opposite result of which they were empowered, he becomes offended. As same example is given as a king. You know, he may see his ministers creating discord among his citizens, so he will be displeased with the ministers. So again, we're approaching the name as a person. So therefore, he does, in one sense, take offense, but he takes offense for our good, so that we can ultimately learn to approach him in the right way. So in other words, we cannot just do anything and everything under the name of chanting. We have to understand there are specific offenses. So, and we will feel, as we've mentioned more than once, the result of offending the holy name is that you lose the shelter of the holy name. So this is the 9th offense. So we should be careful. Also, under this here of to instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name, in other words, we should not, if someone first comes to devotional service and they're newcomers, we don't want to insist, for example, that they follow the regulative principles, the 4 regulative principles, or they chant 16 rounds daily. That's not the first thing you may explain to someone. So again, we have to be kind of intelligent of how we go about preaching. So we don't want to turn people away from Krishna consciousness. Like I know from example, being here in central London, we have so many guests coming into the temple. Of course, we don't have so many now. We have none coming because of the lockdown. But other than that, we have so many people just wandering into the temple. So one of the first things we're not going to tell them is the 4 regulative principles, because they may just, as quickly as they walked in, they may just quickly walk out. So first we have to give them faith in us. We have to give them faith in devotees. Yeah. So that also can be offensive. If we turn someone away because of our too soon preaching, then that will be an offense to the holy name. Yeah. So we must, if you're preaching, if you're speaking to a group of people, then the safe place is to speak to the lowest denominator. Keep it simple. Yeah, higher truth basically is higher, or you could say higher truths or inner meanings of tattva of the holy name. Really, it's only for those who have the required faith. And this was shown by Lord Chaitanya, who among people in general, he simply chanted the holy name. He simply engaged in Sankirtan. But when he was with his devotees, he spoke of Krishna's teachings and general pastimes, but only with confidential devotees, like Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar, did he speak about the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set the example, so we should follow that. We should preach according to audience, time, and circumstance. Also, we should avoid needlessly going or wrangling over high philosophical issues, which is beyond our comprehension to understand. That also comes under an offense to the holy name. In other words, there may be discussion on the fall of the jiva, or the origin, why did the jiva fall to the material world? It's not mentioned or discussed by our acharyas, and it's a very You could say it's a subject which we, from our conditioned state with conditioned senses, will never understand unless it's revealed to us by Krishna at some point. So even if we discuss that with a group of devotees, or we will never come to an absolute conclusion because we have imperfect senses. So in other words, just going over, just trying to understand things which are inconceivable to us. Also, this is considered, it comes under the 9th offense, which is interesting, to instruct a faithless person about the glories of the holy name. So in other words, we should speak, we shouldn't speak over our realizations. And also the same, we shouldn't try and explain topics which people cannot understand. I find it very interesting that these 10 offenses, they specifically state that this offense number 9, they're particularly these 10 offenses, as we mentioned in the first class, if we really understand them and we really learn them, then we should really try to mold our character and our devotional resolve as a person who is free of these offenses. So that is the 9th offense. Is there any questions on that or any comments? Please unmute and ask. I'm just looking at questions here.
I have a question.
Yes, if you just tell me your name and where you're from, that would be great.
I'm Maxim, I'm from London.
Hare Krishna, I recognize you, Maxim. Nice to hear you. Yes, please.
Yes, nice to see you as well.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
There's sunlight coming in here. I'm just going to close the curtain. Yes, go on through it. Please ask. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your lecture. And actually, it's not exactly because you said about the holy name as a person, and actually I hear this very often. Yes, the Harinam Prabhu. I mean, in one point, in something that everybody knows, but from the other hand, actually, I cannot really understand how it is. I understand maybe. Well, I wouldn't say understand, but it's maybe understandable why it is, because when we say holy name is a person, it makes a special mood when we chant, because it's our attitude to this. But at the same time, I cannot understand how it is.
Yeah, thank you for the question. But that's the idea to begin with. That's why we approach the holy name as a person, because as you very nicely mentioned, we're very careful and we're very personal with how we approach the holy name. As far as an actual form, the form is there in most temples, and it's Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. That is Nam Prabhu. That's the form that Krishna takes. So you're not going to see, it's not as if in the spiritual world, as far as I know, unless someone can tell me different, there is not a personality who's walking around Nam Prabhu as such. There's no pictures of Krishna, like we see Krishna manifest his different incarnations and they have different forms, etc. Nevertheless, Krishna has appeared in a specific form, and that is Nam Prabhu. So the syllables and the reading of that Maha Mantra, just seeing it, you are looking at Nam Prabhu. That is Nam Prabhu, and that's what he looks like. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. That is Krishna's specific form, which leads on to another point, is that he is more merciful than even Krishna himself. That's another point. So therefore, in other words, I hope that gives some clarification. If we have the Maha Mantra written down, and we should treat wherever we have it, like I have the Maha Mantra in a frame, and even in some temples they have Nam Prabhu on the altar in a golden frame, and he's also worshipped in the same way as as a person, Nam as a Nam Prabhu. So does that help? Hare Krishna?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting question. Yeah, Nam Prabhu. Yeah. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. This is Vamsidhari Das here.
Hare Krishna Vamsi Prabhu. Nice to hear your voice. Yes.
Yeah,
Please.
Prabhuji. Prabhuji, I have further question on this because I've been confused about this point for such a long time. We have often heard about Harinam Prabhu, but we don't know so much in details about this Prabhu because we always thought, at least I always thought that it is Krishna's name. So at least in my material sense, when we take a name of someone, we are actually referring to that person. So the form that comes to the mind is straight away the personality who has that name. And then
Yes.
when we chant the names of the Lord, we go through the stages of Nama, Rupa, Guna, Leela.
Yes.
So from name comes the form, and the form that should come is Krishna's form. So I get
Yes.
confused about this Harinam Prabhu that in my heart I am not able to understand.
Yeah, very good point. In one sense, there is a non-difference, and also there is a difference as well. Just the fact that Nam Prabhu is more offensive, is more merciful than Krishna. So Krishna manifests as his name, which is non-different from him, but it plays a specific role. In one sense, you could say like Nityananda is more merciful than Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, Lord Nityananda plays a specific role on behalf of Lord Chaitanya to save the most fallen. So in the same way, Nam Prabhu is a manifestation of Krishna.
Yeah.
In that sense, being non-different. So it's a bit achincha beta tattva. Achincha beta beta tattva, simultaneously one and different. So we should understand the oneness, and we also understand the difference in that the name has specific qualities for one sense of being more merciful than Krishna in that sense. And the name can go, although it's non-different from Krishna, it can go everywhere, all over the universe. It can go in people's houses. It can go everywhere.
Yeah.
But Krishna, Krishna, we're not so qualified that Krishna appears in everyone's house. But Nam Prabhu does. And this is the incarnation of Krishna in this age. So Krishna has taken this form by his mercy and grace to enter into everyone, or to enter into everyone's house, into everyone's mouth. That's the mercy of Nam Prabhu. So perhaps just meditate like that. It may be something we do not ever, or we may, by Krishna's grace, we may understand, but we may not be able to grasp it completely because it has a sense of a chincha, which is inconceivable. But still, I think it helps too in this approach to understand the Lord as a person in the form of his holy name. So there's some points which comes to mind on that.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. That's very clean delineation between the two, at least level of depth, which was more understandable. Prabhuji, I have one more question if I can ask.
Yes, please.
Prabhuji, you mentioned that, one under ninth offense comes, when someone speaks above and over their realizations.
Yes.
What happens to the hearers who are listening to such people?
Well, as I mentioned, they may, depends on the specific person, but there's a good chance that they, without having enough faith, they think this person's just speaking nonsense. What's all this about? That this happens and, and this happens and that happens. And they, as I mentioned, they may then step away from devotee association. So that's why we have to be quite intelligent when it comes to preaching. We have to be aware of the person in front of us and ask specific questions so we can perhaps understand quite quickly of where they may be at. And as sure as you know, as an expert book distributor, distributing Prabhupada's books, that's one of the first things you want to do when you stop someone. You may ask them a few questions and find out exactly where they're at.
Yeah. Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you
No
very much.
problem. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Thank you for your questions. If there's no other questions, then we'll go on to the 10th offense. Okay, so the 10th offense, to not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy name and to maintain material attachments, even of understanding so many instructions on this matter. So this, you could say, I don't want to say it's one of my favorites, to not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy name and to maintain material attachments, even understanding so many instructions on this matter. So let's look into this. Let's explore this a bit. Now, this 10th offense is really to be noted by those who have taken initiation. Some persons listening may not have taken initiation, or someone may have just be chanting for the first time. But this specifically is for those who are being initiated into the chanting of the holy name. In other words, if we've heard the glories of Krishna consciousness or the glories of the Lord's holy name, but we still continue our materialistic way of life, in essence, that is an offense to the holy name. So, in other words, if we continue thinking and maintaining that I am this body and everything belonging to this body is mine, and we have in that respect no love and chanting for the Maha Mantra, that is an offense. Interesting, in the purport to the Adi Leela, chapter 8, text 24, Prabhupada mentions that in Harinam Chintamani and also in the Padma Purana, this offense is considered the worst. Why is that? Because it can be the root of all other offenses to the holy name. And interesting, also the next point we'll be speaking about also, which is to be inattentive, that's also considered another root of further offenses. So just keep that in mind. This offense is considered in the Harinam Chintamani, which is by Haridas Thakur, and also in the Padma Purana, that this is considered the worst because from it, all other offenses to the holy name can actually come. So in other words, until we rise above material attachments, and this is the life of a sadhaka, we are taken to the process of Krishna consciousness. And as we read the purport from Srila Prabhupada from the second canto, there should be a specific change of heart. And Prabhupada mentioned there, as well as ultimately tears coming to your eyes and feeling spiritual symptoms, there should be consequential detachment. We should become free of material attachments, things even subtly like envy, ignorance, greed, and pride. Now, if we are attached to these and we continue in the same manner, then that's an offense. It's considered an offense to the holy name. In other words, Lord Chaitanya Hesse explains that by initiation, when we fully surrender to Krishna, it actually means to be free from all material designations and blessed by the Lord. And then we serve the Lord in our spiritual body. But we find, just like Lord Chaitanya, when he took initiation, then he was immediately immersed in his identity and his role as a devotee of the Lord, completely free of all material designations. But we receive Diksha, or we may have received Diksha, but we may not act as liberated souls and probably not aware of our spiritual identity, as with Lord Chaitanya when he was initiated by Ishvara Puri. So in that sense, there's a good chance we, in one sense, will be making offenses. Now, at this point, I'll mention a point which comes up at the end of this discussion, but I think it's worth mentioning now because it's relevant. Okay, we've taken initiation. and we're still dealing with and working through our material attachments. But that's the point. We're dealing with it and we're working through it. And we may be even dovetailing our material attachments. But the idea is we're dealing with it and we're going through it so that ultimately we can be free of these material attachments. But if we have no intention of being free of material attachments, we have no specific enthusiasm, or we're just stubbornly maintaining them, even subtly, with no desire really to be free of them, then that's an offense. This is what it means by this 10th offense. So, in other words, Nam Prabhu takes offense when us, non-liberated devotees, we maintain or cultivate material attachment after accepting diksha or accepting initiation. So we engage in the path of conscious detachment, which means the path of yukta vairagya, where we're engaging using our material attachments in one sense with guidance from the spiritual master to develop Krishna consciousness. So in other words, if we externally make some commitment, we externally commit ourselves to the progressive surrender as a means to please the Lord, but internally we actually do not want to surrender. That's an offense. So that's something to consider as devotees. If there's some particular attachment which we're hanging on to, at some point it becomes offensive. So that's why this discussion is quite sobering in one sense. So this offense and the risk of maintaining it will only kind of go when we abandon all pretense. Everyone knows what the word pretense means. It means a false show. So with purified hearts, we surrender ourselves as humble servants of the holy name. And in that regard, there is a process of surrender, which at this present moment, His Holiness Shivaram Swami is speaking on this subject of Sharanagati. Actually, he's speaking tomorrow, part 3, on this subject of surrender. And here you'll see in the slide here, there's 6 divisions of surrender. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on these too much because it would take too much time. That's a separate seminar in of itself. But let's just read through them. Number 1, accepting whatever is favorable to devotional service. 2, rejecting whatever is unfavorable. 3, being convinced that Krishna will give all protection. 4, accepting the Lord as one's guardian or master. And 5, desiring only what Krishna desires. And 6, utter humility. So this is the process of surrender. So we should spend some time meditating on these points and cultivating these points, especially number 6, as we mentioned in previous class. This is the kind of clue. This is how we can chant, by developing humility, for example. And humility is something which we should, again, meditate upon, think about, read about examples of humility, and try to develop. I mention that at the moment because I'm trying to do that. Presently, I'm doing a little study on humility in desperate call out that I can develop some. I'm doing a study on it, and it really helps. So in other words, again, these 6 divisions of surrender, I'm not going to speak on them in detail, but by practicing this process of surrender, then what happens? We become increasingly submissive to Krishna's will. And then, very interestingly, then surrender, it finally becomes something that is spontaneous. In other words, we are situated in Atma Nivedanam. Prahlad Maharaj mentions in his famous verse in the 7th canto, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Pada Sevanam Achanam Bandhanam Dasyam Sakyam Atma Nivedanam. So surrendering everything, as in Atma Nivedanam, given in the 9 angas of devotion, this is the that's the perfection of Sharanagati, of surrender. So I'm just reading here, very interesting statement given here. Imperfection at Atmanivedanam. Now it's not something that requires effort, nor is it done out of fear, obligation, or duty. It is fully spontaneous. So I'm going on a little sidetrack here, but it is relevant. In other words, Atmanivedanam is a natural activity of a purified soul, ultimately. So this is what the 6 divisions of surrender should bring us to, the natural proclivity of the soul. Yeah. Now that's real surrender. Ultimately, it brings us to that point. So these 6 divisions of surrender play a big point in a devotee's life to actually understand them. I'm also at the moment just reading or singing songs by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who gives descriptions. He sings there's different wonderful bhajans that he's wrote and in regards to these 6 divisions of surrender, called Sharanagati. It's a series of songs. So if you want, you can Google that, Bhaktivinoda Thakur Sharanagati, and you'll see wonderful bhajans on the subject. Now, that's a sincere devotee. They are meditating on these and they are following to the best of their ability these 6 divisions of surrender. Now, the surrender of pseudo devotee. A pseudo means someone who's pretending. It's someone who's making an external show in the name of devotion. In other words, they're secretly enjoying with their senses. So obviously Maya's going to make them forget about devotional service. Now, I'm quite confident that everyone I'm speaking to here now is not a pseudo devotee. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this seminar on how to improve your chanting. But we may meet in our preaching, we may come across some persons with ulterior motives who may be externally showing as a devotee. We've had the experience in our temple many years back. There was one man, he was very, one sense externally very sincere in his, he was a middle-aged Indian man. He was very sincere in his friendship towards the devotees and the senior devotees. This was when I hadn't long joined. And eventually the devotees had confidence in him. He kind of befriended them and he was staying in the temple. And then one day he left with all the temple finances in his pocket. So devotees were mentioning, the temple president at the time, Keshavarti Maharaj, was mentioning, too much devotion is a sign of a thief. So some persons like that exist out there in the material world. They may have no really intention of giving up their material attachments, but they may start chanting. Yep. So we can look at that in one sense, yeah, that's gross, but let's make sure we're not doing that subtly. Are we maintaining material attachment even subtly? Yeah, so it's something to reflect on. It's a sober reflection. So this kind of 10th events is kind of a sober time for reflection. What I do is I stop there. Is there any questions? I might have brought up some points there. If you have any questions or clarifications or something to add. I hope I've not frightened anyone away by these descriptions. Hare Krishna. Okay, so I guess there's no questions on these points. Again, you can use the chat if you want. Now then. So here you see some examples, or you see we're going to give a couple of examples of pseudo kind of devotees, so to speak. So here you see a nice picture. This is Bali Maharaj and Sukacharya and Vamandev. This is from the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapters 4 and 5, I think. Chapter 5, the verse is from, which we'll come to that. So this is an example. So one such example of such a person who's maintaining material attachments is Sukha Acharya. He's a spiritual master of demons think devotees know the story. So he was present when Vamanadev was begged Bali Maharaj for all the land he could cover with 3 steps. And as we know, Vamanadev is the Supreme Lord. So he's going to use those 3 steps to take everything away from Bali Maharaj and consequently Sukha Acharya. So Bali, as we know the story, Bali Maharaj was readily agreed. You know, he was agreed to forfeit everything to please the Lord. In other words, Shaunagati, Atmani Vahidanam. Everything, he was ready. Now, but because Shukracharya, he was attached, he feared to lose his comfortable way of life. So as the story unfolds, he was advising the king, don't do it. Whatever you do, don't give 3 steps of land to this Vamanadev. So Bali Maharaj, even at the cost of disobeying his guru, he gave everything, and eventually he gave his own self. In other words, he didn't want to be a hypocrite. Strong word, but a hypocrite like Sukacharya. In other words, he gave Vamana everything, even his own self. And so this verse here on the slide there, I do not fear hell, poverty, an ocean of distress, falling down from my position, or even death, as much as I fear cheating a Brahmana. So we bring this story up, this to illustrate the point here, that equally, in the same way as Vamanadev, or as Bali Maharaj is speaking, we should be fearful not to cheat the holy name. A sobering point. The same, a very good example, same as Bali Maharaj was very fearful of making an offense or cheating. So in the same way, we should be equally fearful not to cheat the holy name, not to maintain our material attachments. Another example is given of Dhritarashtra. As we know, this is a picture of Vidura asking or advising Dhritarashtra repeatedly to tread the path of righteousness. And I was reading this a little while back as well, this discussion of Vidura and what he says to Dhritarashtra. It's very fascinating instructions that Vidura gives. So many wonderful reasons and logic of why Dhritarashtra should take the path of righteousness. Now, but due to weak-heartedness, he could not surrender. What is that weak-heartedness? Due to his material attachments, he could not surrender. Yeah. Even he, I'm just referring to one quote here, excuse me, which I just like to read it, so I didn't write it down here. Even Dhritarashtra said, "And I know my sons can never conquer the Pandavas in battle, yet I cannot refuse Duryodhana's desire to be king, for I am helpless in the throes of my attachment to him. I cannot resist." Yeah. So there's another example of maintaining material attachments, even at the cost of losing everything. Yeah. And there's another example which Prabhupada gives. He tells a story of, you see this lady here with a bundle of sticks on her back. Prabhupada tells this story of an old woman. She was carrying, I think devotees might know this example. She was carrying a bundle of wood. So the bundle of wood fell down, and she was crying to the Lord, "Oh Lord, oh God, please help me put this clip, please help." Then the Lord appeared to the lady, and she said, "Oh, thank you, my Lord, for appearing. Please, can you help me put this load of sticks on my back?" Now, it's a bit, if you think about it, the idea, one point of view from this example is, if the Lord appears before you, he can do a lot more for you than put the load back on your back. So, in other words, this fable illustrates the foolishness of this 10th offense. In other words, Krishna appears in the form of the Maha Mantra to liberate us, Yet we would rather have him put the bundle of material pains back on our heads by maintaining these material attachments. So it is a very good example to illustrate this point of the foolishness of this woman asking to put the bundle of sticks back on her back. So the same way, maintaining material attachments, despite after understanding so many instructions on this matter. So the question may be, I actually have answered this question already. I've actually addressed this, is whether or not those who have material attachments but want sincerely to abandon them are in a category of offenders. I've mentioned that already. No, they are not. So an additional point on that is that the holy name has descended along with Lord Chaitanya to deliver the fallen people of this age. So how could he take offense at the very condition from which he wants to purify us? He's come to purify us of material attachment. So that's not offensive in of itself. But if we're holding on and we're maintaining their material attachments, then that's something else. Hare Krishna. Any questions on this point or reflections? Please feel free to ask.
I have one question.
Yes.
Yes. Prabhuji, Shukracharya is mentioned quite often in different places. One such interesting place I find his mention is in Bhagavad Gita, that among the poets I am Kavi. Krishna says that.
Yes.
Krishna doesn't say that I'm Brihaspati, the master of demigods. He says I'm the spiritual master of the demons.
Yeah, and he says here, I'm fishes, I'm the shark, no?
Yes, it says that too, yes.
So in that sense, perhaps he was a good poet, but that's about it. That's about it. He was a good poet, so Krishna's using him as an example, same as used as a shark.
Shark.
And he gives other examples. So as much as I can say on that, it's an interesting observation. I can't, he says that in Bhagavad Gita, yeah? Of poets I am.
I'm Kavi. He uses the word name Kavi. Kavi is based on for Shukracharya.
Yeah. Shukracharya comes up a lot. After all, he is the spiritual master of the demigods. Yeah, so he's you might see his name mentioned quite a few times, but he was attached, as the story in the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam illustrates. Despite his being a spiritual master wasn't the spiritual master of the demigods, the spiritual master of the demons. Sorry, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, excuse me, but he's the spiritual master of the demons. So he would engage them in fruitive activities, explain to them the path of karma kanda. Yeah, as much as I can say on that, but interesting point. That's a good observation.
And Prabhuji, one more thing which you were mentioning about material attachments. Of course, in Grihastha life, as Grihasthas, we end up being attached, to family relationships that we are maintaining day in and day out, and other things that we are doing in the daily life. So one thing I read in Bhagavatam 5th canto, where there is a description of the 9 varshas. In each varsha, a specific deity is worshipped. In that varsha, it was mentioned that those people who live in Ilavrat varsha, they can be liberated even though they are materially attached just by being born in that varsha. That is again something I couldn't reconcile in my thoughts.
Yeah.
All of the 8 varshas, it was not so, but in this varsha, if people are born, and even if they are materially motivated, they are still, they have as you said, opportunity for liberation. But if you hold on to material attachments, then there is no solution.
Yeah, another interesting observation. I would think there's 3 different types of activity. One's karma, vikarma, and the karma. So I'm sure in that situation, they're not acting in a vikarmic way in the fulfillment of their desires, but they're doing it in a dharmic way. So in that sense, they're following the process of dharma in order to become free of attachment. And even if they don't, because in a sense, without further study on it, but just of being chaste or being or following Dharma, that in of itself gives one piety, which one may be elevated. No doubt, they're not elevated to the abode of Krishna. They'll be liberated to some other realm, but to return to the spiritual world, then one should be devoid. Anyabilasada sunyam. So they may make progress somewhere by adhering to Dharma, but in order to go back to the spiritual world, then they would have to be
fully clean.
Yeah, anyabilasada sunyam, free from all material attachment.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, it kind of, as you was asking the question, it's something which devotees we should be conscious of. It's very challenging in one sense, being in a family situation. You have children and grandchildren and so many aspects, you could say, to become attached to. And some attachment does have to be there. Otherwise, it's not going to be a very natural relationship or not a very natural environment that you are in. But detachment in that sense comes with knowledge that you understand quite soberly that this is not going to be forever. It's just for a temporary amount of time. So not that in that sense, detachment doesn't mean that we're cold and we're non-responsive. No, it doesn't mean that. We act as a loving father or loving mother, giving all affection to our children and our spouse, etc. But we understand quite soberly that actually that ultimately everything's going to be taken away as such. And in that environment, we're developing attachment for Krishna. So in other words, the husband is creating an environment where the wife can remember Krishna. The wife is helping to create an environment where the husband can remember Krishna. And together, service to Krishna and service to the Vaishnavas becomes their biggest attachment, either over and above to each other. So when the time comes when we do have to leave this world, then our heart can be enwrapped around the thoughts of Krishna. Yeah, that's the yeah. Any other questions on that? Now I'm just checking the time. We're doing quite well. We've got an hour left, and we might finish a little bit early. If we do, if there's questions about the previous classes, I can field those questions. If not, there is something. I was going to read a conclusion to the 10 offences, which is given by His Holiness Shivaram Swami. So let's see how it goes. Hare Krishna. Okay, and if there's no questions, I'll just move on. So I hope this is helpful. Hearing about this, I know for myself, just studying this again and looking at the 10 offences, it's really it really is helping me a lot in my approach to the holy name. As I mentioned, every day we recite these offences, but on studying and hearing about it, it's really, I've become more aware and seeing how important it is to make sure that we are, to the best of our ability, avoiding these 10 offences. So hopefully you're feeling the same as well. So now Srila Prabhupada, as you noticed, he actually adds, it's also an offence to have no respect or love for chanting. He adds this is in the 10th offence. In other words, this is a further cause of offence. So in that regard, we look at the holy name as our guru, the same as we would look at our guru. The holy name ultimately is our guide. He's a best friend and he's a well-wisher. And he's our only means of progress, actually. I mean, what would we do without the holy name? Deity worship in of itself is not, in this age, sufficient enough to take us to the spiritual world. The Dharma for the age is chanting of the holy name. So what do we do without the holy name? So in that regards, we should have a great respect. We should develop a love and respect for the process of chanting. That was, we look at the name or Nam Sankirtan, we look at as an altar by which we all worship. Doesn't matter what stage we are at in devotional service, we should show respect and affection for the holy name. So, but for those whose chanting is not a worshipable deity, but instead it's a dry ritual. In other words, for some it may be just a ritual which they want to get done with as quick as possible. Or it may, for some, it may be a means of livelihood. There's plenty of persons in India, probably other places as well, where they get paid for performing Sankirtan. Or if they don't get paid, they get adoration and distinction. Or they attract members of the opposite sex by chanting the holy name, Kirtan. We don't want to mention more details, but so that means they have no respect for the holy name. They have no love for the holy name. So we should keep that in mind as well. Let me just go back to the temple offense, what it says. To not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy name and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. Yeah, so it's not directly mentioned there, but Prabhupada himself mentions, he adds it, he makes this point that we should have great love and respect for the chanting of the holy name. So, any questions on that? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Okay, so that completes the 10 offense. But before we go, it is also considered to be an offense to be inattentive while chanting the Maha Mantra. Okay, so this is good to, let's study this a bit. Let's look at this. We heard it again. We hear it so many times. Again, as with the last one, also with the 10th offense, this is also considered to be a root of other offenses. In other words, it's not just one of the offenses can be a root to causing more offenses. Actually, in one sense, if they're not adhered to, then all of them could be roots for causing further offenses. But specifically mentioned is the 10th offense, and I think the first offense as well. And here, to be inattentive. That, in other words, if we are not attentive to avoid pitfalls in our chanting, and not just in our chanting, but in our devotional service in general. So good to point out here that when we're speaking about the 10 offenses and avoiding the 10 offenses, we're not just speaking about when you chant your japa. It's whenever you do any devotional activity, whether you're cooking, whether you're making garlands, whatever you're doing service in the temple or for the temple, whatever it may be, if you're engaged in any of the 9 items of bhakti, but for example here you're not attentive, then Nam will take offense. So in other words, the holy name, it rules over all devotional activities. It's the king. So the subjects of the king, if one makes offense, then the king becomes offended. So in other words, for instance, of course, it's a bit of a light-hearted kind of, you could say, but sometimes devotees in a temple, they put too much salt in the khichdi. Sometimes we have to experience that in the temple. Someone puts so much salt in the khichdi. So we kind of say in a light-hearted way, but it's also considered to be offensive while cooking. Also considered to be an offense to be inattentive while cooking. So keep that in mind when we're associating with devotees in general, when we're going about our devotional activities, whatever it may be, we should be sure not committing these 10 offenses. And here we're speaking specifically about inattention. So even if we kind of carefully avoid all the other offences, but we're inattentive while chanting Hare Krishna, then the ecstasy that should come from pure chanting, it will elude us. We will not taste the pure name. And from inattention grows seeds of additional unwanted habits, and these turn and grow into more weeds of inattention. Now, on this point of inattention, in today's day and age, we are generally inattentive just by the nature of the world which we live in. We're generally inattentive. For example, you can be speaking to someone, or you can be doing something or trying to do something, and then you get distracted. In other words, distraction is the name of the game today. So we get distracted by phone messages, we get distracted by Facebook. There's so many distractions. I don't know if anyone's had the experience where you sit down to do some serious reading of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then half an hour later you're on Facebook. Yeah, I mean, we're inattentive. And especially today's modern society, even many, many years ago, I think even when I was at school, we would learn that because people are so inattentive, then the adverts which are shown are just split seconds, 5 or 10 seconds, because no one can hold their attention for very long. Yeah, this is the unwanted gift of so-called modern society. Yeah, people, it's very rare, and it's becoming rarer actually, that people can even read a book from cover to cover. They're just inattentive. And even now, because of the reasons why, could be a big subject, but the food we eat, etc., etc. Young people, I forget what it's called now, but there's a medical term for persons who cannot sit down for 1 minute and concentrate on anything. Unfortunately, some children or teenagers suffer from this. They cannot even sit down and read 2 pages of a book. There's actually a medical term for it, which I forget now.
Short attention span.
Yeah, short attention span. This was never a problem in previous ages. It's a problem now. So we're going to have to contend with that. So the holy name is we should take it as a mean. We should, with all our effort, we should want to be attentive. We should pray to be attentive, and we should make it an effort to be attentive. For example, we shouldn't get used to, that's why it's good to train ourselves to be attentive to everything we're doing. Because when if we're inattentive in life in general, and our mind is wandering from here to there in the material world throughout the day, looking at this nonsense, going, or whatever we're doing, and we sit down to chant the holy name, you're not going to be attentive. It will be impossible. And without some great effort. In other words, another example, which an interesting observation, if we're driving, and sometimes devotees may have a habit of chanting their rounds while they're driving. I tried that once. I was driving back from the vegetable market, and I thought, okay, let me chant some rounds. I'm in a traffic jam, the traffic's moving slow. And I was chanting my rounds while driving. And then I got back and I listened to my spiritual master's podcast, and he specifically said that chanting while driving is an offense. So I quickly stopped that bad habit. Now, in other words, let's just take that one example, chanting while driving. In other words, you're chanting your rounds, just backtrack a minute. We should always chant the holy name, even if we're driving, no matter what we're doing. But when it comes to our 16 rounds, that should be the only thing we do. Our only meditation is Krishna in the form of his holy name. So it's not an offense to be chanting or singing the holy name while we're doing our washing, while we're washing a car, or while we're cleaning the house. But specifically for the 16 rounds. So, for example, One is driving, and they're chanting their rounds. They have the bee bag or clicker, click, click. And they have to be mindful of traffic lights. They have to be mindful of other cars, and they're looking at traffic signals. They're looking at signs there. So there's lots going on within their psyche, within their mind, but they're chanting the holy name as well. So that weakens the resolve, that weakens the ability to recognize inattentive chanting. In other words, one's so used to being inattentive that when one sits down to chant the Maha Mantra, so they're just so many different thoughts and desires will just take them away. And just like they're driving and they're thinking of so many different subjects while chanting, they can be sitting there, or we can be sitting there and think of so many things, but we're just inattentive. And it gets frightening where someone doesn't even acknowledge that they're inattentive. For them, it's normal. So, sorry, I'm making a bit of a case of this point in case here, but it's an example of inattentive chanting. And if we're not trying to overcome inattentive chanting, then that's offensive. Okay, the mind's going to wander here, the mind's going to wander there. Of course, it's going to go here and going to go there. But we become aware of it and we try and bring back our mind under the sound vibration of the holy name. I remember when I was in New York last year, we was in the Radha temple, and we was blessed that Vaisheshika was giving class there. It was Rath Yatra time. And he gave a wonderful example. He said that when we chant the holy name, we should be like we're trying to break something. Now, what does that mean? We're trying to break something. In other words, we should be really quite intense, always trying to fix our mind on the holy name, round after round, just trying to hear the holy name. Like we're trying to break a pot or something. Now, if we do that, guess who's going to be watching us? Krishna. Krishna's going to be watching us. Krishna's going to watch our effort. And he's going to see our effort. And by his grace, if we're making that effort, then he will make things easy. He will manifest the nature of the holy name, whereby which we cannot think of anything else. It will become so attractive. But we have to want that. We have to work for it. Is there any questions on this one point I'm mentioning, or everyone wants to share something? We've got quite a few other points to mention in this regard, but
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
This is Maxim again.
Hare Krishna, Maxim Prabhu. Yes. Please.
Can you give maybe more advice how to be more attentive? It's the first thing I just wanted to ask, because yes, inattentive not only inattentive chanting, the general inattention in life, yes, it's actually big issue, big problem. Yeah. And the other thing, can you share your experience, because you live in a temple, because for somebody like me or some other Grihasthas, maybe we do not, of course everything should be as a devotional service, but it's not the same as living in a temple, because when somebody lives in a temple, everything what he does is actually devotional service. It's surrounded by this, and in this it's much easier to be inattentive, because in normal life I can say, okay, now I can be inattentive, and now I do devotional service, and this is something special. I would be attentive. And can you share your experience?
Thank you for your question. To begin with, living in a temple, we still, I'm sure if you ask any of the brahmacharis or those who live in a temple, we still have to deal with, we still have a issue with being inattentive. In other words, yes, we may be absorbed in different activities of devotional service throughout the day. But if, for example, I'm sitting down and I'm chanting my japa and I'm thinking about the upcoming temple council meeting, that's called an offense. That's being inattentive. If I'm sitting down and I'm chanting japa, and I'm thinking, and I'm thinking, what's for breakfast? That's called inattentive chanting, and it's offense. If we may be sitting down and chanting japa, and our mind goes towards past material activities, say even sensual activities, lust, that's an offense, that's inattentive chanting. So inside or outside the temple, it doesn't really make much difference for your information, at least from my experience. Okay, we have to be attentive to what we're doing at one particular point in time, just for your information. Now, I find myself personally, I like to chant some prayers before I chant, to approach chanting in a prayerful mood. In this regard, Satyananda Maharaj always speaks wonderfully on this subject of approaching the holy name. In this regard, in approaching with great humility and prayer. So you may, before you begin your chanting, you may just have a couple of prayers, don't have to be so many, and just say them with, be attentive to the prayers, and say them and recite them in the mood of begging permission. So that's one way of preaching to the mind, so to speak, to be attentive, or to remind us to be attentive, is to approach, again, to have due respect for the holy name. Another kind of more personal, you could say, determination that I have, or I try to have by the grace of the Lord, is I try to just say I'm chanting from 5:15 till 7, or depends on what service I have. Then I make a kind of, I make a deal with my mind. Okay, so from this time to this time, I should just think about Krishna. I should just hear the holy name. Almost I approach it like a practice of yoga discipline, where you have a discipline of doing different asanas, and you're going to do them. That's your sankalpa. So Satyananda Maharaj also has this as well in his holy name retreats. In chanting retreats, is you make a sankalpa, you make a kind of peace treaty with your mind, and in that way, again, and in that way, if you approach the holy name in this regard, then the holy Krishna is very, very merciful. So we just got to make that effort. And I'm sure we've all experienced to one degree or another, when we're trying to chant, then all of a sudden things become very clear, and Krishna allows us to actually hear the holy name. So there's a couple of points from my personal perspective. One is that in the temple, outside the temple, we all have to practice being attentive. So, and also just just thinking now, what we do throughout the day is very important as well. If we're thinking about nonsense throughout the day, please don't expect to be attentive in the next day when we're chanting. It'll be very, very difficult. So in other words, we should try to be attentive throughout the day in everything that we do, and just try to be on the lookout for exercises in inattention. When we're being inattentive to something, that is not going to. We should want to be attentive to everything that we do. I know it's a challenge, but be on the lookout. As I mentioned, the example of driving. If we look on that will not do us good. In other words, the mindset could be, okay, I could chant my rounds now when I'm driving, but when I sit down tomorrow to chant the holy name, then I'm going to, it's an offense, and the holy name will not be very kindly disposed to revealing its glories to us. So does that help on that question you asked, Maxim?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's great. I would say that from my personal experience, that really,
please,
chant at early morning with temple residents in the temple room. For me, it helps a lot for concentration.
Yeah, thank you, Maxim Prabhu, because that brings us to the next point I was going to make. So firstly, just backtracking a little bit. So inattention, it sows the seeds of unwanted habits that grow into more weeds of inattention. So in other words, it transforms the garden of the heart into like an unsightly patch of weeds, yeah, which is a big mess. Everything becomes a mess, and all the other offences lead from inattentive chanting. I don't know if you've been to a garden which is not, but there's plenty of gardens around which don't have any gardeners attending to the weeds. It looks a big mess. There's one little park here in central London. It's very small, but their their determination for that particular park is everything's natural. In this particular, it's not a park, it's a sectioned off bit of garden. So they deliberately don't do any weeding. And the place looks like a mess. It looks a complete, terrible, unsightly mess. So that's what we want to avoid in our devotional service. And our devotional service can become a mess if we're not attentive, a mess of weeds. So we really should try to be attentive. So inattention gives rise to a word here, apathy. Apathy for our general sadhana. Apathy means, in the dictionary definition, is you don't have any interest. You're really apathetic. If someone's apathetic to something, they really don't have any interest in it. So that's what inattentive chanting leads to, apathy in our regular practice of sadhana. And that in itself, as we mentioned, can cause further problems. So also we shouldn't be lazy in chanting. Sleeping in japa. I mean, I thought of it, but I didn't bring it out. But there's lots of discussions on different types of chanting you should avoid: dive bombing chanting or radar chanting, where you're looking and looking here, looking there. Laziness. Don't sleep when we're chanting japa. In other words, sometimes we may observe that some persons are lazy japa. They're chanting, maybe speaking for myself, and maybe we're chanting and we're falling asleep, but we don't make any effort. I mean, we don't stand up. We don't make an effort to not sleep. You know, we're just lazy. We're just lazy. We're not making an effort. So, in that sense, as Maxim's Prabhu very nicely mentioned, it's good to chant in association of devotees whenever we can, whenever the opportunity arises, or to attend a japa retreat when we're specifically focusing on the quality of the holy name. Yeah. So then we can be inspired. Of course, if everyone's sleeping in the japa room, that might not be so inspiring, but hopefully it's not like that. Yes, so that's another way, which chanting, as Maxim Prabhu mentioned, chant in association with devotees. For myself, my Pacific service, often I'm not there with the devotees in the japa. I'm normally dressing the deities, which is not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. So I often chant after the devotees, after breakfast. But I can tell you, whenever I chant with devotees in a temple room, the quality is so much better. It's so much more, so much more quality rounds just by being in the atmosphere. So that's the kind of one of the fruits of being in a temple. If you're not in a temple, you can put on a tape of Prabhupada chanting. There's so many things you can do. Create a little sacred space where you're not disturbed. But that's a whole discussion as well on japa and when you chant japa according to your schedule. You have to manage that as best as you can. I'll stop. Any questions on that or anything to share from anyone out there?
Prabhuji, there are questions. chats.
Yeah, okay, let me just have a look at that now. Yeah, thank you, Vamsidhari Prabhu. Okay, thank you for the amazing, just like chanting while driving is an offense, does it also apply when traveling on the tube and bus, etc.? Very good point. Now that's a bit different. There we may have to make such, because of the nature of our work, the nature of our, the nature of our work and the schedule we're on, we may have to make such, what's the word, compromises. Now, because less is involved, kind of mentally and physically. I mean, you're not driving the bus, you're not driving the tube, so you're just sitting there. So there's not exactly an offense. It's not it's a compromise, you know. Rather than chanting on the bus or tube, we'd rather be with devotees. What can we do in this situation? So it's not an offense in of itself. But if we're like, it's more difficult. I mean, I've done it, I've tried it, and for myself, if I'm traveling on the tube and bus, I chant on my beads, but I don't count them, and I move my beads, but I don't count them as rounds. But that's because I make time in another part of the day. But you may not be able to do that according to your work or your schedule. So that may be, for instance, traveling on the tube or a train for an hour might be a very important time for you to chant your rounds. So that's okay, but it'd be more difficult. But that's not offensive, but it's more difficult, no doubt. If you can arrange your program where you avoid that, that's good, but you may not be able to. So in that regard, it's how you chant in public as well. It has to be, you don't chant as you would in the temple because you might attract unwanted attention. So you're going to have to be a little bit tactful of your chanting. But if that answers your question, no, it doesn't specifically apply if you're traveling on a tube or bus. It's more difficult, no doubt. Hope that helps. This is from Harsh, that was from Varshapu, and from Harsharani Devidasi. Hare Krishna Prabhu, when chanting japa, is it okay to recite sloka and translation after chanting a round before starting another round to deepen our appreciation of the holy name? Is that class as being inattentive? No, definitely not. Especially if it's after the round, it may help us it'll add a bit more time on our chanting. Not that we want to get it done as quick as possible, but yeah, that's not inattentive. Hope that helps. Hare Krishna. Yeah, that's a nice idea. You might want to do that after each round. There's a prayer you recite about the glories of the holy name. That's that. I mean, that's good. It's good. Yeah, thank you for your questions. Any more questions? Please type them up on the chat. We can field them.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Who's speaking?
It's Anil Sharma.
Hare Krishna, Anil Sharma. Yes, pleji. I think.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It's regarding the offense number 9.
Yes.
When we not to glorify the name in front of the non-devotees, or not to discuss the glories of the Maha Mantra to the non-devotees. It's regarding that. When we sometimes do it unintentionally, we want to glorify the name of the glorify the names of the Lord, but we don't know the other person is devotee or his enemy or whatever he is. So
yeah, then you're just going to keep it very basic. If you're not too sure, don't take any chances. And I don't know if you was not too sure if you was there for our first class that we did about the ultimate effects of chanting, then you're not going to get into so many details. So you just keep it general. Please chant the Maha Mantra. You should chant this mantra, free you from all stress and anxiety. Just keep it very general like that. That would be the best approach to that. Don't take any chances, yeah, that's best.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
No problem. Thank you. Hare Krishna. So we've got half an hour left. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm just going to finish the discussion here. But please put them on the chat, and I'll stop at some point again if there's any questions. Okay, now, so we spoke about laziness, sleeping in japa. please avoid it. So in other words, another way to understand inattention or how it's offensive, in other words, if we, and like the example often given, like when we chant Krishna, we're actually calling out to Krishna. So the same way, you can imagine you're calling out for someone you have affection or family member or loved one. You know, just say you're calling out to someone to come near to you. Then they come near to you, and then you ignore them. So in the same way, we're calling out to Krishna. You know, Krishna hears his name, and he may come to our side, but if we ignore him, if we're distracted by something trifling, and that reminds me, one good tip for good chanting is to put your phone away. Don't put your phone beside you when you're chanting. Put it in a drawer, turn it off, put it out of sight. That's another simple tip for attentive chanting. These little gadgets of can ruin our spiritual life. So that just comes to mind just now. Another tip for attentive chanting: put your phone somewhere else. You know? It's sacred time. It's to be with Krishna, nothing and no one else. So in other words, yeah, then Krishna, like a spurned lover, you know, someone will feel offended, isn't it? If you're calling someone and they come, and then you're on your phone checking your messages, that person's going to feel offended. In the same way, Nam Prabhu will become offended. Yeah, for our own well-being. Yeah. Now, someone may say, yeah, but I don't see Krishna when I chant his name. If I did, I would not ignore him. Yeah, but Krishna is his name, as we mentioned before, when the syllable's Krishna. The Lord is actually present. Now, there's a nice meditation here by Rupa Goswami, because there's a verse by Rupa Goswami that says the holy name dances on the mouth of the chanter. Yeah. It's actually dancing. Radha Krishna, they are chanting on the tongue of a devotee. Now, there's a nice meditation here. So Rupa Goswami, actually, I think this is Shivaram Swami is commenting on this verse by Rupa Goswami. So he says, listen carefully, and from your mouth, Krishna will enter your ears, and from there, the courtyard of your heart, where you will see him alongside Radharani, dancing to the sound of their names. At the sight of Radha and Krishna's wonderful dancing, your mind will cease wandering, and without the mind's prompting, your senses will become idle. Okay, so it's a nice meditation there. We just listen to Krishna. He is present there. Yeah. There's a few questions popping up there. Let me just finish this section here, then we'll fill those questions. So this can all be we're mentioning received by just being attentive. So as long as we're inattentive, there won't be any spontaneous attraction to the name. But once attraction does come from being attentive, then instead we're being indifferent to everything but the name. At the moment, we're kind of indifferent to chanting. We may be. But once we really make an effort to avoid these 10 offenses that we've been discussing and chant in the right mood, then we'll find ourselves to become, the holy name will be the only thing for us in our life. So we mentioned this point about chanting with devotees. Also, what helps, you may take different sankalpas on chanting. You can try with time makes itself available. You can try one day chanting 64 rounds. Arrange your day in such a way that you've got all day to chant, either at home or whatever. Well, now we're all locked down, no? So there may be more opportunity for such type thing. It's a wonderful experience. I've done it a number of times, chanted 64 rounds, and it's like, I cannot describe it. It's such a wonderful experience. Even if I'm struggling to chant 64 rounds, it's like the sun rising, and it's such a wonderful experience for the mind. I really recommend trying it. Or there's some devotees, I heard in Chowpatty, perhaps other places, that on the disappearance of Haridas Thakur, they chant 192 rounds. That's what Haridas Thakur would chant every day, 192 rounds of the Maha Mantra. So I know my spiritual master does that on occasion. So you may try that. You just chant and chant and chant and chant all night. You just keep chanting. It's a wonderful experience. Okay, let's just look at the questions here. I'll finish the points I was going to bring up specifically. I've only got left, if time is there, to read conclusions from Shivaram Swami on this subject, but let me just go through the questions. Okay, yes, so Padmananda Chinanda is mentioning, there's quite a few points here, there's a lot going on. Yeah, these the previous classes 1 and 2 which we gave, they're not available as of yet, but they will be available. They're just working on it to make them available so you can hear them. Just reading from Padmananda Chinanda Prabhu's message. If you would like to be notified by email of more seminars organized by the London College of Vedic Studies, then please get in touch with Padmananda Chinanda. But we hope that the last 2 classes will be put up there so you can hear if you're interested or you missed it. So question from, I'm sure that's not his name, Android, but it comes up as Android, from Android phone, I presume. Hare Krishna, if you chant Panchatattva mantra before chanting, do you get offences to chanting? Did it consider offense? Very good point. Why didn't I mention that? Prabhupada mentions that. Thank you. We should chant the Panchatattva Maha Mantra before we chant the holy name of the Lord. And no doubt by doing that, that will greatly help us to be free of offences. But it doesn't mean just because we've chanted Panchatattva mantra, we can be inattentive, because it doesn't matter. We chanted the Panchatattva mantra, so it doesn't matter if I use my iPhone and do this and do that while chanting. That's considered to be one of the offences, to commit sin on the strength of the holy name. So yes, we chant the Panchatattva. Thank you for reminding us about that before we chant the Maha Mantra. But it doesn't make us, what's the word? Doesn't make us free from offense if we're not. We shouldn't take it for granted. I hope you understand. I hope it's clear, yeah? Otherwise, it's to commit sin on the strength of chanting. But yes, chant the Panchatattva Maha Mantra, and we can be free of undue offences, but still, it doesn't give us license to be offensive. Another question from Harsharani. Oh yeah, she's asking, is it possible to get recordings of today and the last 2 seminars? I've addressed that. Padmananda Chinanda, hopefully he can give us more information on that. They're working on it. Yes, he says they're working on it, and it will be available on their website. Divya Radhika Mataji, Hare Krishna Mother. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for these sessions. Although I appreciate the importance of chanting in association with devotees, I do sometimes get distracted when devotees chant loudly and I can't hear my own chanting. What to do in such a situation? Thank you. Very good point. I read something from Pada Vida Prabhu he put up. I thought it was very nice. Depends on your specific relationship with the devotee. But if the devotee is chanting very loudly and it's difficult for anyone else to hear the holy name, then it's good if someone can, in a nice, humble way, speak to the devotee. We should make sure we do it not in an agitated or angry mood. If we feel that within us, perhaps we might bring it to the attention of their superior, or we might bring it to their attention outside of the japa time. We might humbly approach the devotee. But no, you can. If it's done in the right mood, in the correct way, it's not offensive at all. Sometimes devotees lovingly get carried away. I mean, we have it in our temple. They just lovingly get carried away in one sense, and they end up chanting so loud that they're not even aware of it. And most devotees, when we may say something, they're sorry, and they will chant, and and they would turn the sound down a bit. We had one devotee who would chant japa with us in the temple, and we'd ask him, we chant so loud, and every time we'd ask him to chant, please chant quietly. And he'd chant quietly for like 3 or 4 minutes, then gradually the volume would go up again, exactly where it was before. So, devotees are wonderfully chanting with enthusiasm, but we should be aware that within ourselves as well, our chanting. Are we chanting too loud so other people cannot hear? So it's called sensitivity in chanting ourselves, and sensitivity in dealing with other devotees who are chanting too loud. But thank you for bringing that point up. I hope that helps. Another question here. Is it all right to have a recording of Srila Prabhupada chanting while I am chanting? It is. We have that in our temple room. But as my spiritual master said recently, making a good point, that it should be on a volume, a very low volume, that we're chanting. We should hear our chanting. We should make sure we're absorbing our chanting. In one sense, you could say, well, isn't it bad? Isn't it not bad to be, absorbed in Prabhupada's chanting? No, we're the ones chanting. So it can be there, it shouldn't be too loud. You should be able to distinctly follow the sound vibration that you are making. So be sensitive of that. We are sensitive of that. I think most temple rooms, in most temples that I know, during japa, they have Prabhupada chanting as well. But the volume is at such a volume that everyone can hear their own chanting very nicely. So it's okay to do that, but make sure you are hearing your own chanting. Hope that helps. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So, kind of nice time. If there's not any other questions or comments, I just perhaps, if you don't mind, I beg your attention, so to speak, as we've been describing about attentive chanting. And I'm just going to read some concluding words on this subject that we've been speaking about. I can't hear you, but I presume you don't mind us doing this. So please, we'll read for 10 minutes or so. See how far we get. So this is a conclusion of this subject of avoiding the 10 offences. So this is directly reading from New Raj Mahima by His Holiness Shivaram Swami. Okay. Allow me to summarize what I have said regarding the offences to the holy name. Repetition is good. We who seek pure consciousness must tremble at the thought of offending Krishna's holy name. Scriptures say that the holy names and Krishna's power are equally inestimable. Reciting the Maha Mantra is devotional service, and because bhakti begets bhakti, chanting brings more devotional service. Whether chanted properly or improperly, pronounced correctly or incorrectly, spoken of or remembered millions of times or but once, the holy name, without doubt, delivers us from material bondage. But misusing the name of Krishna for sensual pleasure, for accumulating wealth, and for collecting followers, or committing any of the offences described, delays the result of chanting. Offences are like heavy weights placed upon a bullock cart. They slow down its forward progress. The Padma Purana says, Na pala janakam sigram. The desired result will not come soon. Although Krishna says that in executing devotional acts like chanting the Maha Mantra, there is no loss or diminution, the time it takes for devotion to mature depends on how free we are from offense. O dear devotees, please try to understand the seriousness of offenses to the holy name. Because these offenses are the basis of atheism, the scriptures call one who commits them just that, an atheist, a basandi. Also, the word aparad means to be distance from worship, which in a deeper sense means to be distance from Radha, who departs with the benefits of bhakti when we offend Krishna's name. We must therefore diligently avoid offences in chanting the holy name of the Lord. But if somehow or other we do commit offences, we must continue to chant with increased effort to chant purely. The holy name of Lord Krishna is all-powerful, is transcendental. It is Krishna. Thus only the name can wash away all sins accumulated from offending it. For this reason, we should never stop chanting. In the following verse, Krishna explains that only two spiritually powerful yoga systems, Jnana and Bhakti, can rectify sinful activity resulting from accidental downfall. But if we commit premeditated sins or other offences, the word yoga in this verse refers only to the chanting of the Lord's holy names. Krishna says, if because of momentary inattention, a yogi accidentally commits an abominable activity, then by the very practice of yoga, he should burn to ashes the sinful reaction without any time employing any other procedure. If we commit an offense to a Vaishnava, however, then we should also beg forgiveness directly from the Vaishnava or Vaishnavi whom we have offended, as did Durvasa from Maharaj Ambarish. In this regard, the book Nama Kamodi says, an offense to a great devotee is removed either by suffering the result while chanting Hare Krishna or by the mercy of that devotee. Dear devotees, if you are greedy for the pure devotion relished by great souls, then pray constantly at the lotus feet of the holy name. Avoid offenses to that merciful Saviour and chant, chant, chant. Still, to be free of offenses, we must do more than try to avoid them. The Lord ordered Brahma to learn the science of devotion by both direct and indirect means, in all circumstances, in all space and time. Thus, we should cultivate the saintly qualities of pure Vaishnavas as related in scriptures, for even attempting to do so will keep offences at bay. Kapila Dev recounts these qualities and their effects. Quote, the symptoms of a sadhu are that he is tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies, he is peaceful, he abides by the scriptures, and all his characteristics are sublime. He engages in staunch devotional service to the Lord without deviation. For the sake of the Lord, he renounces connections such as family relationships and friendly acquaintances within this world. Engage constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Lord. These sadhus do not suffer from material miseries because they are always filled with thoughts of my pastimes and activities. From these teachings of Lord Kapila, we should learn to serve and honor devotees, great or small, according to Vaishnava etiquette, and to worship Sri Krishna as the one Supreme Lord without the second. We must honor our spiritual masters, especially the initiating spiritual master, and while respecting all scriptures, strictly follow those preeminent texts that reveal the glories of the holy name. Practitioners who are convinced of the glories of the holy name and are faithful to the teachings of their gurus will neither doubt the power of the holy name nor try to explain it in unauthorized ways. By strictly following devotional disciplines such as attending spiritual programs, we gain the spiritual strength to resist and root out sinful habits and to abandon all other religious and ritualistic acts. Excuse me. Always careful to speak to the level of advancement of those to whom we are speaking, fully surrendered to the Maha Mantra, we become exemplars who inspire others to chant Hare Krishna without offense. In addition to these divine attributes, we cultivate the quality of attentiveness. Once, Srila Prabhupada was leaving an Indian embassy in New York, and he asked the devotee accompanying him, Did you notice the painting in the ambassador's reception room? The devotee looked around blankly and said, "No, Srila Prabhupada." His divine grace replied, "That is a fault. You should be attentive." Armed with these virtues, we quickly cleanse our hearts of all remaining impurities. Then we can chant the pure name of the Lord and taste the many wonderful symptoms of ecstasy. But if such divine bodily symptoms have yet to appear, then we should know that our chanting is still riddled with offences. Shonaka Rishi explicitly states, "Certainly that heart is still framed, which in spite of one's chanting the holy name of Lord Hari with concentration does not change when ecstasy takes place. Tears fill the eyes and the hairs stand on end." About this verse, Srila Prabhupada says, if the reaction does not take place even after continuous hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offences only. Leaving behind all offences and adopting the conduct of a true Vaishnava, we entered the clearing stage of chanting, the stage at which all manner of bad habits are systematically wiped away. As unwanted habits disappear, the taste for and pleasure derived from chanting the Maha Mantra increase step by step, as does our hankering for the perfectional stages of devotional service. As feelings of separation develop, so does the eligibility to receive Krishna's mercy. And by crying and crying for it, we will one day successfully secure the Lord's causeless grace. With a mere touch of his personal potency, excuse me, Krishna relieves his devotees from the influence of Maya and awakens in them spontaneous ecstatic devotion, the first stage of loving devotion. Beginning at the stage of ecstasy, our chanting opens the bud of love, petal by petal, diffusing the sublime fragrance of transcendence and mixing it together with various raptures to create the elixir of rasa. When the mature mellow of devotion awakens in us, the chanting of the holy names opens a transcendental realm that is known only to the eternal residents of Vrindavan and no one else. Dear Vaishnavas, please hear the confessions of an offender to the touchstone that is Sri Krishna's holy name. By the intercession of your blessings, may I be freed from my transgressions. When I first chanted Hare Krishna, I was filled with extraordinary feelings that made me wonder if this is just a beginning. What realms of rapture do the coming years have in store for me? Seated in the temple, I would watch the devotees enter what I thought was deep trance, only to realize later that these were not symptoms of ecstasy, but of ignorance known as sleep. In time, my own bliss peaked and then descended into what at times took the form of a struggle with drowsiness and other thoughts of material life, much to my dismay. Why, I wondered, was my taste for the holy name waning? The answer was clear. By over-familiarity with devotees, I was offending them, and by over-familiarity with the name, I was offending it. Many years have come and gone since those days, and with them many attempts to eradicate bad habits, to beg forgiveness from the name, and to cultivate the qualities of a true Vaishnava sadhu. It's coming to the end here. Sometimes the sun of Krishna's names would shine through the clouds of my bad habits and warm me to the very core of my being with its benevolent rays and soothing vibration. Once again, I would rejoice. On one such occasion, during a Harinam in London, I felt as if Lord Chaitanya were personally singing and dancing in a Sankirtan party. I was not the only one who felt that way on that night. Now and then, to attract the Holy Name's mercy, I scheduled myself to follow Haridas Thakur's regulation, and I held extended Sankirtan sessions, now called the Holy Name Day. Sometimes I would fast, sometimes cry, and sometimes do parakram of Navadvip. But the service most enduring to the Holy Name, I believe, was Prabhupada's own simple formula, preaching. Just as the thick darkness of night gives way to the rising sun, which colors to horizon bright shades of red, the gradual dissipation of offensive habits gives way to the colorful pastimes of namabas. While pronouncing the shadow of the holy name, I felt, amongst other things, absolved of sin, protected from Kali's grip, freed from evil influences, and blessed with depth in my study of scripture. But most importantly, I felt my taste for the Maha Mantra return, a taste more pronounced in the company of like-minded Vaishnavas. Once again, I felt the delights of bygone days. It was just as Rupa Goswami describes. By carefully chanting these sweet names every day, a natural relish awakens within his tongue, and his disease is gradually destroyed at the root. That dawn that follows a storm is clear, cloudless, filled with birdsong, and blessed with tranquility. In that pristine state, Mother Nature displays her colorful sweetness and majesty. Now, at times, while chanting Japa or Sankirtan, as soon as I pronounce Krishna's name, I feel Krishna's presence and raise my arms to the sky to offer him my one and only possession, my heart. At other times, as the chant before the deities, I become inexplicably absorbed in their forms, qualities, and wonderful pastimes. Speechless, I'm left to wonder, what do I do now? And there is more, but I think I'll stop there to finish on time. Hope you don't mind me indulging in reading that part of the Vraj Mahima, because this is the conclusion that Shivaram Swami gives on avoiding the offences. And Hare Krishna, I just want to, before we go, I share a picture of Radha Landaneshwara for your pleasure, and I thank you sincerely, wish you all success in your own endeavours in chanting, in reaching the altar of the pure chanting of the Lord's holy name. This is our life. We dedicate our life to this, to chanting Lord's holy name. And I pray also, please keep me in mind, and you may wish me well in my endeavours to achieve the same. Hare Krishna. If there's any final comments, we've got a few seconds left, 1 minute. If not, I'll invite Padmana Nityananda Prabhu to perhaps come on, and if he's got anything he wants to announce.
Hare Krishna, Murli Manohara, thank you very much for the insightful seminar. We're getting a lot of comments saying thank you from Brittany Mataji, Vimal Prabhu, everyone saying thank you. So, anyone else? Anyone else? Did Divya Radhika Mataji, did you have a comment or question?
No, I did ask my question. Thank you.
Okay.
There's a few people, Padmana Prabhu, who are asking me about recordings of the last the classes. Is there any particular time scale when it might be available?
We've sent it on to the comms team, so we're just kind of waiting and working with them to kind of put their recordings on. But as soon as they're on, I can send around to the WhatsApp groups and stuff, like the volunteers group.
Okay, so we'll be patient.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Or
yeah, we've got another seminar tomorrow with Chaitanya Jivan Prabhu. So it's going to be about, it's part of a series called Understanding Men, Understanding Women. So just looking at kind of how to communicate. Yeah, just giving advice to devotees and couples, how to communicate better and listen to each other better. So it's very useful advice. So yeah, please join us again tomorrow. I think it's at 2 till 4 again, like today. And just once again, thanks a lot, Murli Manohara Prabhu, for the very insightful seminar. And I'll end it here.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for a good class.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.